Hey everyone, God bless you. In this video, I will be answering the question, was Jesus' death a sham and his resurrection a hoax? This will be looking at the medical evidence that Jesus Christ actually died on the cross. And in fact, anyone who went through Roman crucifixion would also have died. Believe it or not, I've actually met people who have said things to me like, throughout history, haven't you heard of people who have somehow survived the electric chair? Or throughout history, people who, during the gallows poles were dropped to be hung, their neck actually didn't break and they survived. Or people surviving the guillotine, they somehow pulled their head back in time and their head wasn't cut off and they were then able to go free or something like this. I said, yeah, sure, I've heard of people surviving an electric chair execution. However, they didn't survive it twice, right? Typically, maybe if someone did survive it twice, there was something seriously wrong, and eventually got the person killed. He went from there. This person presenting this to me was like, hey, if people survived an electric chair execution, wouldn't you think at some point in time in history someone has survived a crucifixion? Don't you think this is probably what happened with Jesus? He actually survived crucifixion, and from that, he then fooled people into thinking that he was back from the dead. So I have actually heard this presented. I've used what is chapter 1 of Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Easter, to respond to such claims or such questions or objections. And that's what I'm going to be outlining for you in this video, which is also going to be put on my podcast, which is called Reconnect. So you can also maybe check out the full podcast, which has more parts to it. It's episode 91 of my podcast, Reconnect. All right, so before we get into the outline of the medical evidence that I will give from Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Easter, I want to first just talk about the cross. What if we made the cross today? I'm sure this picture here that you see, someone took the picture not going, oh, cool, I'm taking some shadows of some barn doors. They literally took it probably going, oh, cool, a cross. Maybe they were taking it as some sort of artistic photo, right? Some sort of nice way of presenting the cross, or having something like that going on. So I think today a lot of people have just turned the cross into a fashion statement, maybe a piece of art, a piece of jewelry, a symbol of hope or peace. I asked a class of high school students if they know anyone who wears cross necklaces, even though they're not Christian, and someone raised their hand. It's actually a student from China that's at our school, an international student. And I asked her, okay, well, why do you think your friends wear the cross? And she goes, because it's cute. I mean, the cross is the last thing that we would consider to be cute, right? But a lot of people wear it as such. I've even seen a fashion line now of clothing where the entire clothing line is just a ton of crosses intricately kind of pieced together in a pattern, just a repeating pattern of crosses that covers the entire shirt or pants. Isn't that pretty bizarre? I mean, wouldn't that be online as like someone taking an electric chair and hanging it around their neck? I mean, wouldn't you see that and be like, whoa, dude, that's pretty creepy. That's not right. I mean, could you imagine someone taking like a syringe, and it's supposed to be a lethal injection syringe, and they hang it around their neck, and they go, yeah, but it's so cute. You see it's pink, has some cool diamonds on it. Or let's say someone takes a hemp necklace, right, and it's actually a guillotine noose. And they're like, yeah, man, it's just a fashion symbol. It's just kind of cute, kind of cool. No, we would think they're sick and demented if we saw this sort of stuff, right? Because we recognize these things are forms of killing people. You're walking around with execution devices hanging around your neck. You're tattooing execution devices to your body, and you're thinking that's cool. You're thinking it's trendy. Like, what are you doing? Most people along those lines, we would look at that and be like, dude, that's bizarre, man. That's creepy. I don't know if I want to actually hang out with you. I don't know if you're a sane person. Maybe into some really creepy things if I see you walking around with this. But for whatever reason, when it comes to the Roman instrument of execution known as the cross, we seem to think it's just fine to put some jewelry on it and hang it around our necklace, or let's get a gold cross. Yeah. I mean, people that are not Christian do this, right? I can understand the Christian maybe doing it to help remind us of Christ's sacrifice for us. But I think all this is just to prove that the cross has lost its punch for us, all right? The cross has lost its punch because when people see it, they no longer think, man, this was actually used to brutally, agonizingly kill people by Romans publicly. We maybe can ask questions like, couldn't someone have survived crucifixion? So to dig into the readings of Case for Easter, Lee Strobel does share that the Quran says that Jesus survived crucifixion. He does mention that there is a supposed burial site of Jesus in Srinagar, Kashmir. He also mentions how a couple people named Karl Barth and Carl Venturini think the swoon theory, which is the theory that Jesus actually survived the cross, is possible, and that there should be some evidence within the gospel text that it could have occurred. And also he mentions a bunch of popular literature books that espouse this idea that Jesus survived the cross. I want to dig into those just a little bit more, just so you can see where this is coming from. So before digging at the medical evidence, what do people have to offer as evidence that he actually survived the cross? All right, so from the Quran, Lee Strobel says it's in the Quran, but he doesn't actually show the verse from the Quran. So I'm going to pull that up for you really quickly, just so everyone can see it. This is Quran, it's Surah chapter 4, it's verse 157. Here you see it in Arabic, and then the Sahih International translation. Here's what it sounds like in Arabic. And you can see it's kind of cool on the screen as it's sung. The Arabic words are highlighted, so you can sing along if you want. The entire Quran put to song. I mean, it sounds really pretty. All right, translation then of what you were hearing. It says, and for their saying, indeed we have killed the Messiah, Jesus the son of Mary the messenger. All right, so they're saying that they killed Jesus. This would be Jews and Christians that's referring to from the previous verse, which I don't have accessible for some reason, so sorry, but it's Jews and Christians that's referring to here. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed, those who defer over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumption, and they did not kill him for certain. So this is the Quran saying Jesus did not die on the cross. Instead, someone else was made to resemble him to them. Muslims usually say someone like Judas Iscariot was made to look like Jesus and was actually the one crucified on the cross, not Jesus. This is how Muslims would explain this. Or they say someone like Barabbas, who the Bible says was switched out for Jesus, actually wasn't switched out. Jesus got away, Barabbas was put on the cross, and all this was done through Allah. Somehow Allah made this happen. All right, this is how they explain it. This is the verse you can actually see in the Quran where they claim that Jesus wasn't crucified. And those of us that defer with that, like myself, it says are in doubt about it, and it's only on the following of assumption that he was actually crucified. Nothing about historical evidence by Roman historians, Jewish historians that claim he died under Pontius Pilate. Completely disregarding the fact that the Bible is written by the Gospels are written by either eyewitnesses of Jesus' life or people that wrote based on eyewitness testimony. John, the author of John, actually claiming to have seen Jesus die personally. Just disregarding all that, it's all based on assumption. All right, that's the Quran for you. The other one mentioned is that in Srinagar there is a tomb that is supposedly Jesus' tomb. Here's a BBC article on this. Tourists flock to Jesus' tomb in Kashmir. A belief that Jesus survived the crucifixion and spent his remaining years in Kashmir has led to a rundown shrine in Srinagar, making it firmly onto the must-visit in India tourist trail, which is pretty amazing. It says here the reason for this whole theory is because of New Age Christians, unorthodox Muslims, and fans of the Da Vinci Code. But that's kind of, I guess, neither here nor there on that part. It says officially the tomb is the burial site of Yoza Asaf, a medieval Muslim preacher. But a growing number of people believe it is, in fact, the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth. And I guess Yoza Asaf is similar to the name Jesus in translation or something like that. Other points here. It's a story spread by local shopkeepers just because some crazy professor said it was Jesus' tomb. They thought it would be good for business. Tourists would come, after all, these years of violence. And then it got into the Lonely Planet, and too many people started coming. And one foreigner, he gave me an apologetic look, broke off a bit from the tomb to take home with him, so that's why it's closed now. Pretty interesting. Anyways, that's kind of that. The other thing, so I don't from other things I read this from some other articles, this didn't even really emerge as being claimed as a tomb of Jesus until the late 1800s. So there's not any evidence connecting this to the first century at all, as being something that, you know, Jesus survived the cross and made it here to be buried in Srinagar, Kashmir. The other point of this digging deeper slide I have is that Karl Barth and Carl Venturini think there's evidence that supports, you know, what the Quran says is a possibility, and this idea that he was actually buried in Kashmir. And that's that Jesus was somehow given a drug to appear as if he had died and then was taken off the cross before actually being dead. And then somehow was revived by the cool air of the tomb that he was placed in. And then, you know, doesn't explain how the stone was rolled away and he actually recovered from the flogging and crucifixion enough that people would actually go, hey, he rose back from the dead. But going with like the Kashmir thing, he somehow booked it and pieced out to India after having somehow survived this. The evidence they used to support he could have been given a drug is that while Jesus was on the cross, he said he was thirsty, and then he was handed, he was a sponge with vinegar wine was lifted up to him to drink. And the idea is that that vinegar wine had a chemical in it that made him appear to die, which means somehow the Roman soldiers must have been bribed into this process. So who would have bribed the Roman soldiers to lift up some drug chemical to make Jesus pass out? Jesus would have orchestrated this, really? He would have actually went through and said, I'm going to go through a flogging and go through crucifixion in order to pull off the greatest hoax of all time to just peace out to India afterwards. Really makes no sense. The other thing they point to is that Pilate was surprised that he had already died. So he was given a chemical, passed out. Pilate surprised he died early. So they put that together to justify maybe he was given a chemical. The other thing with this that Strobel mentions is that there are a lot of popular literature books that make this claim as well. Here's one of them, The Passover Plot. Pretty amazing. Passover Plot. Finally, back in print, the special 40th anniversary edition of Dr. Schoenfield's international multi-million copy bestseller, set to rock the establishment view of the life of Jesus all over again. Check out this review down here. It's pretty amazing. I first read this book 40 years ago, a young man interested in this other man named Jesus. I have looked for this book for over 40 years and could not find it anywhere till now. I am 64 today. This book, from what I could remember of it, impacted my life in many ways. It opened it up to a better understanding of Jesus the man. It was instrumental in forming my beliefs with regards to organized religion and a better ability to feel at peace with my belief system as the years went by. But it is not the same reading a book of this kind as a young man as it is now, as an aging adult taking on new meaning. This rereading of the book has been a great rebirth to me and has helped me understand from where some of my spiritual beliefs come from. So instead of trusting what's historically written about Jesus in the Bible in the first century by eyewitnesses or people that wrote based on eyewitness testimony, this guy is going to trust this guy in the 20th century that makes up stuff that's never been heard of before about Jesus by anyone else as something that's completely life-changing. This guy must be very, very credible, and you can see it sold millions. Another one mentioned was the Jesus Scroll. Check this one out, the Jesus Scroll. This book is based upon the author's claim that he viewed a scroll that was apparently written by Jesus in AD 67 in Masada. And then this person, it's difficult to tell if this is a fictional or actual story. If true, it is by far the most profound book ever written about Christ. The most profound book written about Christ, if it's true. Right? But what's the evidence that this is true? All this stuff supposedly emerging in the 20th century. And Strobel mentions 4 or 5 other books of this nature that make this claim that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. So what are you going to go with, you know? Are you going to trust a book written 600 years later, the Quran, claiming he didn't die by a guy that in no way has any direct connection to Jerusalem in the first century? Are you going to trust some tomb that has no evidence to back it up and according to BBC is actually a tomb of some medieval Muslim preacher, and it's only supported by New Age Christians and very unorthodox Muslims? Or, are you going to trust some sort of pop fiction literature from the 20th century, some people trying to make a buck by claiming they got some new revelation about Jesus? Okay, so from there, let's actually look at the evidence. Did Jesus die on the cross? All right, and so with Jesus, the torture of the cross, the agony of the cross, actually began much earlier. Even before his arrest, the Bible records that in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is sweating blood. All right, and some people, I guess, skeptics look at this and go, sweating blood? Is that even possible? I, as a Christian, read that and go, sure, it's possible. He's God. He can sweat blood. No big deal. I actually pictured it was only blood being sweated out, but the doctor, Dr. Mithril, that Strobel interviews in Case for Easter, chapter 1, says that sweating blood is medically possible. It's called hematidrosis, and it's a high degree of psychological stress that obviously is severe anxiety that produces chemicals in the body that then break down the capillaries in the sweat glands, and then the sweat comes out tinged in blood. So he actually is sweating sweat. There just happens to be a little bit of blood in it, so it comes out looking red, So he is sweating blood. It's just not sweating only blood. And this is medically possible. And the Dr. Strobel interviews, Dr. Mithril, says that this hematidrosis would actually cause the skin to be very fragile and frail, which would mean when the whipping comes at the flogging he receives, the skin would have been that much easier to break open and tear, which is just horrible to hear about concerning our Savior Jesus Christ. The Roman flogging that he had, usually 39 lashes, and the idea was 39 lashes would be the amount right before death. So they tried to flog a person to the point of death. And 39 was apparently a number that they came up with. It's not your typical whip. The Roman whip had metal balls with it, as well as sharp pieces of bone. The metal bars, the metal balls would actually bruise the skin, and then with the subsequent lashes would actually tear the skin and cause the skin to open up with open wounds. The bones would actually latch into and then rip the skin off. It's very brutal when you actually read how bad this was. Some Roman historians actually say that the person's insides would be laid bare. You could actually see their intestines and stuff, and their spinal and their spine visible from a Roman flogging. Many people would die even from the flogging alone, largely not just because of infection and stuff during this time in the first century, but hypovolemic shock would occur from the amount of blood loss here. Hypo just means low, volume, emic, blood. So you'd have a very low volume of blood, which could cause fainting, blood pressure drops, kidney stops producing urine, extreme thirst, and like I said, many people would die just from the flogging alone. So Jesus shows many signs of hypovolemic shock. He did faint carrying the cross, but even if it wasn't hypovolemic shock, probably having a flogging like that, it'd be hard to carry a cross afterwards. In the crucifixion itself, the nails would go through the median nerve. And this median nerve would be in the wrist. If it was put in the palm, the weight of the person, it would just tear out, right? It would just tear through. There's no bones there. So they put in between the two bones in the wrist. This would still be the hands anatomically in Greek, and a medical doctor actually says that this is still considered the hand anatomically even for us today. It's the wrist. So the nails would have been through the wrist so it could support the weight of the person being crucified. The median nerve would be crushed in this process, which is similar to the pain of hitting the ulnar nerve, which is the funny bone, except, of course, this would be a constant feeling. So that little sharp pain you get when you bump your funny bone is now going to be constant with the median nerve being crushed. The word excruciating actually comes from this type of pain. The word was invented specifically to describe this pain. It means out of the cross. So imagine how bad this is that they actually had to create a new word to express how painful it was. So if we ever used the word excruciating, we would be using extreme hyperbole, because whatever we're going through is far from experiencing what Jesus went through with the suffering of the cross. The official cause of death in crucifixion is asphyxiation, which is to die essentially by suffocation. The way this happens is the person hanging up on the cross is not allowed to, I believe it is exhale. All right, so they can inhale down here, but they can't exhale with the weight. So they have to push up to breathe out, which lights always go off in my room. All right, I'm on sensor, sorry. So so they would have to push up on the nails in their feet, ow, right? And to be able to breathe, and then they drop back down, or to exhale, and then they drop back down to be able to inhale. So they have to keep going back and forth between these two positions. So ultimately, the person dies of exhaustion. Dies of asphyxiation because they get too exhausted to keep going through this process, or too much blood is let out so that they can't have the energy to keep doing this. And this process could last a very long time, hours, maybe days. Obviously, being flogged maybe wouldn't last as long as someone who's crucified without having been flogged. Another interesting thing medically is that the hypovolemic shock would have caused a rapid heart rate, leading to heart failure, resulting in the collection of fluid in the membrane around the heart, as well as around the lungs. This would be a pericardial effusion and a pleural effusion. And this is important medically for us to know, because it explains how and why John, when Jesus, after actually being dead, and the centurion, or the soldier, I don't know if it was the centurion in charge or just another soldier there, pierced Jesus in the side with a spear, John saw blood and water both come out. This would be a sign of, death as well, that this would have pierced the heart and certainly would have killed him if he was not already dead. The scripture says he already was dead. So I think all this shows us that it's very it's impossible for someone to have survived this medically. And the question then for us is not just how graphic this is and to lament over every single aspect of Jesus' suffering and death, but to really ask ourselves, what motivated Jesus to willingly allow himself to be degraded and brutalized the way that he was? And it's because he loved us. He willingly went through this, knowing that this is what he would go through. I think definitely explains the extreme level of stress that he had and anxiety that produced the hematidrosis state in the Garden of Gethsemane. But just knowing this is what he would go through, he willfully did it. He obeyed the Father. This is what he did. He went through with this for us, for our salvation. And it really makes the magnitude of what he did for us that much greater, just to know how tough this was for him, and that he didn't defend himself. He easily could have avoided this by just not saying blasphemy on the trial in front of the Sanhedrin, by actually giving a defense for himself with Caesar. He didn't do any of that. And he willfully went to this. And being God, he could have easily taken himself off the cross, as the mockers asked him to do. But he didn't. And he took it. And even as he's hanging there, he's asking God the Father to forgive those who put him up there, who were mocking him. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, that is deep, extreme love. That, as Romans 5:12 says, that he died for us while we were still his enemies. He died for sinners, for the ungodly. That's really good news. And it's the good news that reconnects us into a right relationship with the Lord.